In the port of Los Angeles, there are thousands of shipping containers just sitting there, empty, abandoned, worth about $3,000 each, but nobody wants them. On the other side of the Pacific Ocean, in Shanghai, shipping companies are desperately scrambling to find containers because they don't have enough to meet demand. They're even manufacturing new ones at a cost of $3,500 each. So, here's the obvious question. Why don't they just ship those empty containers from Los Angeles back to China, where they're actually needed? The answer is both simple and completely insane, because it's cheaper to just leave them there and build new ones. What makes this so fascinating is that, by all accounts, this shouldn't make any economic sense. A container costs thousands of dollars. It's a reusable asset. It can last 10 to 15 years. And yet, shipping companies routinely abandon them on the wrong side of the world rather than bring them back. And this isn't just wasteful. It's a fundamental problem that breaks global trade, causes massive shortages, and costs the industry billions of dollars every single year. This is the story of why a steel box that's designed to travel the world often only makes a one-way trip. To understand this, you first have to understand a harsh economic truth about global trade. It's completely unbalanced. The flow of goods around the world is not equal, not even close. China exports about $3.5 trillion worth of goods every year. The United States imports about $3.8 trillion, but the U.S. only exports around $2 trillion. That means containers are constantly flowing from Asia to North America, packed full of goods. But when those containers need to go back, they're often empty, or barely filled. And this is where the math starts to break down. Here's how the economics work. Shipping a 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles costs somewhere between $1,500 to $4,000, depending on market conditions. That container is packed full of TVS, furniture, toys, electronics, high-value goods that justify the shipping cost. But when that container arrives in Los Angeles and gets unloaded, what happens next? Ideally, a company in the U.S. would fill it with American exports, maybe machinery, chemicals, or agricultural products, and ship it back to Asia. But here's the problem. There isn't enough U.S. cargo heading to Asia to fill all those containers, so shipping companies have a choice. They can wait around in Los Angeles hoping to find cargo to fill the container for the return trip, or they can send the container back to Asia empty. And here's where it gets wild. Sending an empty container back to Asia costs money. You're still paying for fuel, labor, port fees, and ship space. But you're making zero revenue because there's nothing inside. In many cases, it actually costs more to ship an empty container back than to just abandon it and manufacture a new one in Asia. Let's do the math. Say it costs $1,000 to ship an empty container from Los Angeles back to Shanghai. That's $1,000 in pure cost with zero revenue. Meanwhile, a brand new container manufactured in China costs about $3,500. So you might think, well, obviously you'd ship the empty one back, because $1,000 is less than $3,500. But that math ignores a critical factor: time. While that empty container is sailing back across the Pacific, which takes about 2 weeks, the shipping company could be using that valuable space on their ship to move other containers that are actually making them money. A ship slot is a limited resource. If you dedicate space to an empty container going back to China, you're giving up space that could be used for a paying customer. So the real calculation isn't just $1,000 to ship empty versus $3,500 for new. It's $1,000 to ship empty plus the opportunity cost of lost revenue from that ship slot versus $3,500 for new. And when you factor in that opportunity cost, abandoning the container and building a new one often makes more financial sense, even though it seems completely insane. But there's a second, even bigger problem: repositioning costs. Even if a shipping company does decide to bring empty containers back to Asia, they don't always end up in the right place. Remember, containers need to be where the cargo is. If all your manufacturing customers are in Shenzhen, but your empty containers are piling up in Shanghai, you still have a problem. You now need to move those containers from Shanghai to Shenzhen by truck or rail, which costs even more money. So you're paying to ship the empty container across the ocean, and then paying again to move it to the right location. At a certain point, It's just cheaper to abandon it and build a new one exactly where you need it. This is why you see massive container graveyards in places like Los Angeles, Long Beach, and European ports. Thousands of empty containers just sitting there, rusting, taking up space. Some of them will eventually get repositioned back to Asia when shipping rates are high enough to justify it, but many of them, they'll just sit there for months or even years. Some will get sold off to local businesses who repurpose them as storage units, tiny homes, or pop-up shops. But most of them are just dead weight, expensive assets that are cheaper to abandon than to move. And this problem gets worse during boom and bust cycles in shipping. In 2021, during the pandemic shipping crisis, container shortages were so severe that shipping companies were manufacturing containers as fast as possible to meet demand. They produced about 6 million new containers that year, double the normal amount. But those containers were built to meet short-term demand spikes, not long-term needs. By 2023, when shipping rates crashed and demand normalized, suddenly there were way too many containers in circulation. And where were most of those excess containers? Sitting empty in North America and Europe, exactly where they weren't needed. The shipping industry calls this the empty container repositioning problem, and it's one of the biggest inefficiencies in global trade. According to industry estimates, about 20% of all container ship capacity is wasted moving empty containers around the world. That's 1 in every 5 containers on a ship just taking up space, burning fuel, and making zero money. If you could magically solve this problem and eliminate all empty container movements, you could reduce global shipping capacity needs by 20%, cut emissions by millions of tons, and save the industry billions of dollars. So, why hasn't anyone solved this? Well, they're trying, but it's incredibly complicated. The core problem is that global trade is fundamentally imbalanced, and you can't change that with clever logistics. China makes stuff, America buys stuff. That's the flow. Unless the US suddenly starts manufacturing and exporting as much as China does, which isn't happening anytime soon, containers will always pile up in the wrong places. Some companies have tried digital platforms to match empty containers with exporters who need them. The idea is simple. If you're a US company that wants to export goods to Asia, you can use an app to find nearby empty containers and book them at a discount rate. This benefits everyone. The exporter gets cheaper shipping. The shipping company gets some revenue instead of moving the container empty. And the container ends up back in Asia where it's needed. But in practice, this doesn't work as well as it sounds. The timing has to be perfect. The container has to be in the right location. The exporter has to be shipping to the right destination. And all of this has to align with the shipping company's schedule. Most of the time, it's just easier to send the container back empty. There's also a quality issue. Containers get damaged, they get dirty, they get contaminated. If a container was used to ship chemicals, you can't immediately reuse it for food products without expensive cleaning. If a container has structural damage, it might not be worth repairing. So even if you wanted to reposition a container, you first have to inspect it, clean it, and possibly repair it, all of which costs money. Sometimes it's cheaper to just scrap the damaged container and build a new one. And then there's the ownership problem. Not all containers are owned by shipping companies. Many are owned by leasing companies that rent them out. These leasing companies own millions of containers and lease them to shipping lines on a per-day basis. When a container ends up in the wrong place, it's the leasing company's problem to reposition it, not the shipping lines. But the leasing company might not have ships to move it, so they're stuck paying daily storage fees at the port while trying to figure out what to do with it. In many cases, they'll just sell the container at a loss to get rid of it, rather than pay months of storage fees. This whole system creates some truly bizarre situations. During the 2021 container shortage, when shipping rates were sky high, containers were so valuable that there were reports of them being stolen. Organized crime groups in places like California and New Jersey were breaking into port facilities and trucking yards, loading empty containers onto stolen trucks, and selling them on the black market for $5,000 to $10,000 each. Empty containers became more valuable than the cargo inside them. But just 2 years later, in 2023, when there was an oversupply, those same containers were practically worthless. There's also an environmental angle here that most people don't think about. Every abandoned container represents wasted steel, wasted energy, and wasted resources. Manufacturing a new container requires about 3.5 tons of steel. Mining, smelting, and shaping, that steel produces roughly 2 tons of CO2 emissions. When you abandon a perfectly good container in Los Angeles and manufacture a new one in China to replace it, you're essentially doubling the environmental footprint. The industry is producing about 3 to 4 million new containers per year. If even 20% of those are unnecessary, because we're abandoning reusable containers elsewhere, that's 600,000 to 800,000 containers worth of wasted emissions and resources. And the problem is getting worse, not better. As global trade continues to grow, the imbalances are becoming more extreme. China's manufacturing dominance is increasing. E-commerce is booming, which means more goods flowing from Asia to consumers in the West. And the U.S. trade deficit keeps growing, which means even fewer exports going back. Some economists predict that by 2030, the empty container repositioning problem could waste 25% of global shipping capacity instead of 20%. So, what's the solution? Honestly, there isn't a perfect one. Some experts argue that we need to fundamentally rethink the container system itself. Maybe containers should be collapsible so they take up less space when empty. There have been prototypes of foldable containers that can collapse to 1/4 of their normal size, which would make repositioning much cheaper. But these designs are more expensive to manufacture and less durable than traditional containers. So far, they haven't been widely adopted. Another idea is to regionalize container pools. Instead of having containers constantly traveling around the world, you'd have separate container pools for different regions. One for Asia, one for North America, one for Europe. Goods would be transferred between containers at major hub ports instead of using the same container for the entire journey. This would reduce the need to reposition empties across oceans. But it would also require massive infrastructure changes and coordination between shipping companies who currently compete with each other. Some people argue that the real solution is to fix the trade imbalance itself. If the US and Europe manufactured more goods domestically and exported more to Asia, containers wouldn't pile up in the wrong places. But that's a much bigger economic and political question that goes way beyond shipping logistics. It would require reshoring manufacturing, changing trade policies, and fundamentally restructuring global supply chains. That's not happening anytime soon. In the meantime, the industry is stuck with a system that's fundamentally broken. Shipping companies keep building new containers to meet demand spikes, knowing that many of them will eventually be abandoned. Port authorities keep dealing with massive piles of empty containers taking up valuable space, and exporters in North America and Europe struggle to find affordable containers because they're all stuck in Asia. It's wasteful, inefficient, and expensive, but it's also the rational economic decision for individual companies, even if it's terrible for the system as a whole. This is the paradox of the abandoned shipping container. It's a $3,000 asset that's designed to last 15 years and travel the world. But because of imbalanced trade flows, opportunity costs, and repositioning expenses, it's often cheaper to just leave it behind and build a new one. It's economically rational, but logistically insane. And it's a problem that's costing the industry billions of dollars and wasting millions of tons of steel and fuel every single year. So, the next time you see a pile of shipping containers sitting abandoned in a port or repurposed as a coffee shop, remember, that container isn't there because someone forgot about it. It's there because in the bizarre economics of global shipping, abandoning a perfectly good steel box on the wrong side of the world makes more financial sense than bringing it home. What do you think? Is there a better way to solve the empty container problem, or is this just the cost of doing business in global trade? Let us know in the comments below.